Around 2 years ago, I made a review on a little game known as Gran Turismo 2, one of my favorite games of all time, and what is arguably the best racing simulator ever made. Although Gran Turismo 4 does give it a little bit of competition, admittedly, to this day I'd say my Gran Turismo 2 review is one of my favorite videos I've ever made. But looking back on it, it does have a few faults and things I missed out on talking about, which is why 2 years later, I'm going to re-review one of my favorite games. As of posting, the original review has been unlisted, but you can still view it through the SlayerCoon Reviews playlist if you so wish. To start off, it must be mentioned how important the first Gran Turismo game was to the simulation racing genre. Genuinely realistic sim-style racers were uncommon to say the least before Gran Turismo hit the scene. You either had highly arcadey feeling racers like Ridge Racer, or a kart racer such as Mario Kart or Diddy Kong Racing. Take Ridge Racer for example. The game only had like 3 tracks, all of which were just different variations on the same course, and only about a dozen or so cars. When Gran Turismo hit the scene, it had 140 cars and 11 tracks, on top of an in-depth racing career simulation and realistic car handling. It basically made games like Ridge Racer obsolete with the amount of content it offered. I've already reviewed the first entry in the GT series, so be sure to check that review out if you are interested. But what is more important is seeing how Gran Turismo improves on the formula set by Gran Turismo 1. I won't be discussing arcade mode as in much detail as my previous GT2 review, firstly because arcade mode is more or less an afterthought in GT2. Thankfully, it was improved by the time GT3 came out. And secondly, I can't seem to get the arcade mode ROM working on my current emulator, so I'll end up having to borrow a bit of footage. Hopefully that isn't a problem though. Arcade mode is a great way of warming up to this game if you've never played a simulation racer before. However, in order to unlock all the tracks, you have to do licenses in simulation mode. Otherwise, you'll be left with a measly 4 tracks. I feel that's the wrong way of going about things, and the next game in the series would thankfully get rid of this approach. You're given a diverse set of cars to choose from, and can even unlock extra cars by getting first place in the races. The track selection is arguably the best I've ever seen in any racing sim, and there's nearly 30 of them, which really puts most racers of the time to shame. I'd argue that there isn't a single bad track in this game, with one exception, but I'll get to that later. Arcade mode is honestly an afterthought, but the most notable thing about it is that the game's intro can only be viewed by booting up the arcade mode disc. And what a great intro it is! The intro is set to a fantastic indie rock track called My Favorite Game by Swedish band The Cardigans, and it really sets the mood for this game, as this really is my favorite game. But what's even better is the Japanese intro, which comes with the heavy metal theme song called Moon Over the Castle. And it's so damn good it renders the North American intro obsolete. It's such a banger of a track, and it saddens me that the North American versions of Gran Turismo never got it. However, before I take a look at simulation mode, I want to take a little while to talk about my favorite tracks in the game, alongside my personal least favorite. Tahiti Island. This is the first track available of all things. You'd normally expect a tropical island themed track to be unlocked later down the line, but never mind. This track just gives off so much atmosphere, and it's an easy track to learn as well. Just a shame that this track is never returned in any of the future games. Hopefully we'll see it in Gran Turismo 7, but don't keep your hopes high. Red Rock Valley Speedway. I'd argue that this track is one of the best in the entire series, full stop. And yet again, it's one that is never returned in any future games. It has a very simple and fun figure 8 style layout, set to a beautiful sunset backdrop. It's tracks like this that are the reason why Gran Turismo 2 is the favorite of many GT fans, myself included. Seattle, the home of grunge and the best city to drive around in a purple Corvette, or a red one in my last video. It's a very scenic track that even has an incline where your car can get some air. It's a great track, and it was even massively improved in the sequels, now sporting a beautiful sunset. Deep Forest Raceway, quite possibly my favorite track in the entire game. It has an incredible atmosphere to it. The dreamy sunset in the background is absolutely gorgeous. You could make the argument that this is the best track in the entire series. It is competing with a lot of other great tracks, but just the atmosphere this track gives off is unmatched. Super Speedway. I don't know why I was so harsh on this track looking back, because for what it's worth, this track is great. Yeah, it is so easy that you can drive around it while blindfolded, but it's not the worst track in the game by a long shot. That title would go to Smoky Mountain South. Smoky Mountain North was one of the best rally tracks in the entire series, so it's a shame to see its southern extension be so bland and pointless. The track layout isn't bad, it's just that the scenery consists of nothing but trees and clouds, so this track ends up feeling claustrophobic as a result, and very depressing to race on. Not really a bad track per se, but a really boring one. With that out of the way, now it's time to talk about Simulation Mode, the real party piece of Gran Turismo. You start off with $10,000 to your name, of which you must buy a used car with. There's a ton of different cars to start off with, out of the 650 total cars in this game, which is insanely impressive for a PS1 game. Most PS1 racers didn't even dare to have 15 cars. For my playthrough, I chose an early 90s Skyline. Most people start off with the 93 Toyota Supra, but I wanted to be different for a change. Before you can participate in most races, you are required to do license tests, which are a controversial part of the Gran Turismo series. For as much as people don't like them, I personally don't mind them, and I think they're a lot easier than most newcomers claim. Plus, it gives a good feel on how this game handles, as Gran Turismo 2 is very realistic for a 1999 racing game. Once you're done with all that, it's time to start racing. And there's a ton of races in this game, ranging from races with compact cars, muscle cars, races divided by country, you name it. This game has so much to offer that it can put certain PS2 games to shame with its sheer level of content. You even have endurance races that go as long as 2 hours. Even though I'm personally not a fan of these races, they do offer large amounts of prize money and rare prize cars, so eventually they are worth doing even if your butt cheeks have gone numb by the end of the race. But the weakest races in this game by far are the rally events. It's sad because racing around on the dirt tracks is very fun, so it's sad to see that the rally races in this game are basically worthless. The prize money you get from them is pathetic by the time you'll start doing them, and there are no prize cars even for beating every single rally race. But what I do enjoy are these one-make races you can find at various dealerships, and while these races don't offer much money or any prize cars, there's something nice and relaxing about them. By Gran Turismo 4 they were brought back and finally offered prize cars for beating them, so they're merely a novelty here. If there's one thing Gran Turismo 2 excels at, it's the presentation and aesthetics. I already mentioned both of the game's opening intros, but I never went into detail about its licensed soundtrack. The North American version of Gran Turismo 2 features mostly 90s alt-rock tracks and a wee bit of electronica as well. While it is pretty good, there are only about 6 different songs, and each song repeats during races until the race is over, as opposed to cycling when the song is over. So if you're doing an endurance event, you could possibly be hearing the same song on repeat for upwards of 2 hours. I'd recommend listening to an album or a podcast during the races. The menu music, on the other hand, is hecking perfect. Each dealership city comes with its own unique theme, and they all fit the mood perfectly. The Japanese dealer theme sounds very Japanese. And the American dealer theme is as American as it gets. And the rest of the menu music is all amazing as well. The Gran Turismo series in general has some of the best menu music of any video game series, and this entry is no exception. Now, while the North American and European licensed soundtracks may be mediocre, the Japanese version comes with its own original soundtrack, consisting mostly of prog rock jazz fusion instrumentals. Even though it too loops until the end of the race, I'd say it's better than the ones the rest of the world got. Part of me prefers the North American OST, but that's mostly down to nostalgia. And the menus. Dear God, the menus. They are quite easily the best designed game menus I've seen in any game. The simulation mode menus have more aesthetic than Vaporwave. Like how each car dealership comes with a map screen based off of a real-life city, the photos of cars when entering separate car dealers, and the previously mentioned menu music playing in the background. What's also cool is that the cars come with their own bios, going over the history of them. This is more than just a racing sim, but an encyclopedia of cars. I remember spending hours as a kid just reading these. I was such a dork. And then there is the graphics. Nowadays, it doesn't look like much. In fact, most newbie gamers nowadays would probably say that it looks like shit. But for a 1999 PS1 game, this was very impressive and even realistic for the standards of the console. From what I've read, this game uses almost 99% of the PS1's hardware power, and I totally believe that. The details on the cars and tracks, the sheer number of cars and races, I'm shocked the PS1 could even get this game running. I've seen footage of this game upscaled on an emulator in 60 FPS, and it honestly looks like it could pass for a Dreamcast launch title. And as previously stated, there are games nowadays that don't have nearly the amount of content that GT2 does. And then there are the engine noises. While not that realistic by today's standards, they were pretty impressive for a 1999 PS1 game, and nearly every car has a unique engine noise. Keep in mind how there's nearly 650 different cars in this game. That is very impressive. There are a few cars with rather odd engine noises, however, like the Camaro, which sounds like a vacuum cleaner. And then there's a Mazda Demio you can unlock that when fully upgraded sounds similar to a UFO. I've praised a multitude of things in this game in length, but by far my favorite thing in this game is the event generator. In order to unlock it, you have to beat the Super License. In my previous GT2 review, I claimed you had to unlock it by beating the GT League, but that was just my memory screwing up on me. It's a great reward for finishing every license test, and I honestly never get bored of it. It chooses a random course in cars for you to race against, and the variety is almost limitless, even if it takes 20 painful seconds just to load a race. And yes, I am going to show you all of it. In fact, I'm pretty certain it takes more than 20 seconds to load a race, so, just be patient whenever doing these. Or, you know, if you have an emulator, you can just use time skip and skip to the beginning of the race. That's what I do. I consider Gran Turismo 2 not only the best racing sim of all time, but just one of the best games ever, period. And it was a massive success as well, selling over 9 million copies, making this masterpiece the third best-selling game on the PS1, and it totally deserves that. Yet despite that, Not a lot of people within the YouTube gaming community seem to talk about this one. Like, I've seen so many top 10 best PS1 game lists on YouTube that don't even include this game, and it never fails to frustrate me. This game is simply a must-play. Even if you aren't into racing sims, you have to give this game credit for being a real system pusher. The amount of cars, tracks, and events still hold up, which is why so many people consider this the best Gran Turismo game of all time. Hell, to this day, Gran Turismo 2 is my most played game of all time. I've put well over 2,000 hours into this game throughout the years, and I'll probably be playing this game to the day I die. It is that good. Gran Turismo 2 gets my first ever 10 out of 10. It is a game that everyone needs to play. Even if you're more into Mario Kart or Need for Speed, this is a game worthy of any gamer's collection. Fun fact, when I was originally writing the script for the OG version of this video back in 2018, I kept misspelling the word discs as dicks. I don't know why. Maybe I have dyslexia, or maybe I'm just hungry for a thick juicy hot dog. Did you know that this game's sequel, Gran Turismo 3, actually has a lot less content? I'll get to this in a later review hopefully, but Gran Turismo 3 only has 180 cars and 19 tracks, compared to GT2's 650 cars and 27 tracks, which is a pretty big problem in my opinion. But a sequel having less stuff than its predecessor isn't anything new. You know, I'm honestly looking really forward to Gran Turismo 7. There's no doubt that it'll blow GT Sports mediocrity straight out of the water, and it's even going to have some classic tracks as well. I really wish they'd bring back Red Rock Valley and Tahiti Island, but that's probably not going to happen. But then again, I might end up wrong about that, so hopefully I'm proven wrong within the next 2 years or so.